As my gaze drifted into the enveloping darkness of the night, I felt a surge of emotion swell in my chest, raw and unrelenting, as if the shadows themselves carried the weight of my uncertainty. The quiet hush of the world outside wrapped around me like a shroud, the night air thick with unspoken truths and memories that clung to the edges of my mind. Slowly, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the card Marilyn had given me. Its presence felt heavier than paper, like a talisman burdened with meaning I couldn't yet decipher. I stared at its surface, my fingers running gently across the familiar texture of the cardstock, its corners worn slightly from my repeated handling. The ink, though simple, seemed to glow faintly under the dim glow of the streetlight behind me. Names. Numbers. A brief phrase scrawled in Marilyn's tight, slanted handwriting. But more than that, it held echoes of whispered conversations, of Timothy's fragile laughter, of Marilyn's warning tone when he placed it into my hand as if passing me a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. The memories tied to it spiraled through my thoughts, moments tangled in a blur of emotion. Timothy's haunted expression when he spoke of his mother, the subtle tremble in his voice when silence lingered too long, and the way he often stared into the distance, as if looking for something lost. I held the card a moment longer, allowing those fragments of the past to wash over me one final time. Then, with a sigh that felt like surrender, I let it slip from my fingers. It drifted slowly, twisting in the night air before settling soundlessly onto the foundation at my feet, like a leaf falling at the end of a long autumn. I didn't look down. I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew. Whatever had happened to Timothy, whatever quiet suffering or unseen turning point had shaped him, it belonged to something larger than either of us, a greater design, some intricate pattern that life had woven with care and cruelty in equal measure. It wasn't my place to untangle that thread. The balance had been struck delicately, and interfering might snap the whole structure apart. And yet, an unsettling feeling churned beneath my skin, deeper than instinct, an ache that pulsed with dread. It gnawed at the edges of my thoughts, whispering doubts I couldn't silence. Marilyn's words echoed in my head like a distant tolling bell, his close to the edge. But it's not your place to pull him back. Only he can decide. But what if the edge wasn't a path to clarity or healing, but to something darker? Something irrevocable? What if fate wasn't a benevolent hand, but a silent executioner waiting to strike when no one was watching? The weight of that uncertainty pressed down on me, heavy as iron. I felt paralyzed between choice and surrender, torn between the impulse to act and the wisdom to stay my hand. Was it cowardice or trust that kept me standing still? Needing to escape the storm inside me, I turned back toward the bar, its warm, golden light spilling onto the sidewalk like a promise of comfort. I pushed the door open and slipped inside, letting the low hum of music and laughter wash over me like a tide. I hoped it would quiet the turmoil within, even if only for a moment. My eyes scanned the room instinctively, and there were Timothy and Grace. They were seated casually on the couch near the pool table, close enough that their knees nearly touched, a quiet intimacy settling between them like a veil. They were talking, animated but unhurried, the kind of conversation that spoke of comfort, not urgency. Grace laughed softly at something he'd said, tilting her head as she smiled, and Timothy's face lit up, not with joy exactly, but with something quieter. Peace. In that moment, it was like the chaos of the world had melted away. There he was, no longer the fractured man I had worried over, but someone transformed. His grief, though not gone, seemed to have softened around the edges. He had found a way to carry it differently, not as a burden, but as a part of who he was. His eyes, once shadowed, now held a quiet clarity, as though he had made peace with the pain and chosen to live anyway. It struck me then with full force. This was healing. This was growth. And I, standing there on the outside of it, was not the missing piece. I was simply a witness. Any intervention on my part now felt not only unnecessary but invasive. This tableau of quiet connection, of slow rebuilding, was perfect in its fragility. To insert myself into it, to second-guess the very forces that had brought him here, would be to disrupt something sacred. A breath escaped me, deep, steady. The storm within began to calm. I sauntered across the room until I reached Marilyn, who stood in quiet contemplation, one hand resting on the back of a chair. I tapped him gently on the shoulder, and he turned toward me, brows raised in quiet curiosity. "Where's the room?" I asked, my voice low but steady. I didn't need answers anymore. I just needed rest. Marilyn rose from his seat with the fluid ease of someone who always seemed to know just a little more than he let on. As he began ascending the narrow staircase, he paused, tilting his head toward me and motioning for me to follow. "It's the second and third doors on the left," he said over his shoulder, his voice carrying an odd zeal wrapped in mischief. His eyes flicked toward me with a knowing glint, and just beneath the surface of his words lay a smirk, subtle, yet unmistakable. There it was again, his penchant for orchestrating moments, as though life were a theater and we were merely actors maneuvering across a stage he had secretly written. I knew that look all too well. He was playing matchmaker, or mischief maker, in that curious way of his, always nudging, never pushing, his fingers invisible on the scales of fate. But I didn't have the patience for his games tonight. His impish humor felt misplaced in the wake of everything. My bones ached with exhaustion, my thoughts too cluttered to entertain his juvenile antics. I climbed the stairs alone, the creaking wood beneath my feet echoing like old memories. As I passed the second door, something tugged at me to stop, but I ignored it and moved to the third. My hand met the cool brass of the doorknob, turned it slowly, and pushed the door wide open. The room greeted me with a quiet stillness, thick with the scent of aged pine and candle wax. It was modestly appointed, but not without charm. Sturdy wooden furniture, rough-hewn and honest, stood like sentinels around the room. A writing desk nestled beneath a flickering wall sconce, a dresser with drawer handles shaped like curled leaves, and an armoire standing tall in the corner like a mute guardian. The bed, low to the ground, bore the only softness, a thick mattress dressed in a hand-woven quilt, promising a rare moment of rest. I stepped inside, closing the door gently behind me, the latch clicking with finality. I let myself sink onto the edge of the bed, my limbs grateful for the relief. My eyes wandered lazily toward the window, framed in knotty wood and hung with heavy curtains drawn just enough to allow a view of the night beyond. The stars were out, sharp and silver, embedded in a velvet sky. But as I stared, something strange began to stir. It started subtly, almost too faint to notice, a shimmer, a twitch of the light. Then, ever so slowly, hairline cracks began to spread across the glass. Thin, deliberate lines spidered outward like frost forming on a winter pane. They crept methodically, curling and branching in odd, unnatural patterns, too intricate, too alive. My breath caught. A soft hum seemed to rise from the window itself, a vibration I could feel deep in my chest rather than hear with my ears. The air in the room shifted, thickened, charged with invisible tension, as though the very walls were holding their breath. Instinctively, I raised my hand and waved it before me, as if I could shoo away whatever illusion had seized the glass. But as my palm moved through the air, the cracks responded, accelerating, dancing along the surface like living veins. And then, between the shifting fractures, a shape began to emerge. A face. Not a reflection. Not my own. Something else. Something other. At first, it was like staring into the negative space between shadows, but slowly the contours took form, eyes too large and luminous, sunken cheeks, and a mouth fixed in a silent grimace. My heart thudded in my chest. The figure behind the glass moved, and with that motion, it stepped through, not through the window in the literal sense, but as though the barrier between its world and mine had thinned, allowing it to bleed into this space. The hairs on my arms rose as adrenaline flooded my veins. I backed toward the wall, every nerve alight, bracing for some kind of confrontation. I was no stranger to strange things, but this was different. Out of the shadows stepped a boy, though calling him a boy felt both accurate and profoundly inadequate. He was slight, barely taller than my chest, but his presence filled the room. His skin was an unearthly shade of olive green, smooth and soft-looking, almost waxen in the candlelight. His hair, if it could be called that, was a wild, leafy tangle, its emerald strands shimmering like wet grass under moonlight. There was a faint stoop in his posture, a delicate curve to his back, as though he carried a weight he couldn't shed. But what truly seized my attention, what froze me in place, was the weapon in his hands. A bow. Not wood, not metal. Flame. It flickered, weightless yet solid, its burning arc narked with a single arrow made of glowing ember. The arrowhead pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat, and it was aimed squarely at me. The boy's eyes met mine, strikingly human in shape, but gleaming with a depth I couldn't comprehend. There was no malice in them, no rage, only something bygone, watchful, testing. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My breath came shallow, and the silence stretched tight between us like a thread on the verge of snapping. Then the boy spoke, his voice quiet, melodic, but with a resonance that felt like it vibrated through my very bones. "You are not where you were meant to be," he said, and the flame of the bow flared brighter. "How can you see me?" I managed to ask, my voice rough with disbelief, as though speaking the question aloud might unravel the impossibility before me. I stared at the boy's face, young, yes, but unnervingly calm, almost practiced. His existence clashed against everything I thought I understood. He didn't carry himself with the grace of the divine. There was no aura of omniscience, no crackling air of celestial command. All he possessed was that bow, wreathed in flame and silent menace. And that weapon, I knew, could only be seen by those who carried the spark within them. The divine spark. Like Timothy. Like me. The boy hesitated, his chest rising and falling with small, deliberate breaths. Then, as though summoning courage from some buried place, he straightened ever so slightly and spoke. His voice was thin, trembling at the edges, but he tried to lace it with power. "I am the son of Anu," he declared. He delivered the words like a curse, hoping the name alone would be enough to make me recoil. He expected awe, fear, deference. But all I felt was clarity, a puzzle piece falling into place. I raised my chin and met his gaze fully now, those gleaming, otherworldly eyes flickering uncertainly as I stared into them. Recognition bloomed in me. Anu, the god of Catapino. I raised a single finger and flicked it through the air, summoning just a sliver of my own divine authority. A ripple shimmered between us, and in the space of a heartbeat, the boy's bow vanished. One moment it was there, pulsing with heat and menace. The next, it was gone, snuffed out like a candle in the wind. The boy gasped, staggered, eyes darting around wildly as if the weapon might have simply fallen or been misplaced. But there was no trace. No embers. No smoke. Nothing. Just air. His bravado cracked like thin ice under pressure. His chest heaved as I stepped forward, each of my movements slow and measured, the air around me charged with unspoken intent. Panic took hold of him, raw and primal. He balled his fists, a low cry catching in his throat, and lunged at me with wild, chaotic swings. His strikes were graceless and erratic, more the flailing of a frightened child than the assault of a warrior. He swung like someone trying to swat away fate itself, but his arms found only air. I sidestepped easily, letting his momentum falter before I slipped behind him in one seamless motion. My hand closed around his throat, not hard, but firm, a silent assertion of control. I didn't need to choke him. The gesture alone was enough to stop his resistance. He froze, trembling, his back pressed against my chest, and I could feel the rapid, shallow beat of his heart pulsing through the thin layer of muscle and skin between us. Only his voice remained free. "How did you get here?" I asked, my tone low and steady, the calm of a still ocean concealing its undertow. The question wasn't just about logistics. It was about betrayal, about trespass. The boy swallowed hard. I could feel his throat convulse beneath my fingers. "My mother," he began, the words tumbling out unevenly, soaked in dread. "She sent me. She said to collect Chris's head. Said it had to be done before the solstice." I blinked, startled, but not surprised. The name rang through me like a struck bell. Chris. The reason Marilyn had watched him so closely. The reason I had felt something off, lurking just beneath the surface of this night. I couldn't help but laugh, quietly, dryly, as I released a breath through my nose and shook my head. "You know that's not what I meant," I said softly, tightening my grip just enough to remind him he wasn't in control. "How did you enter this realm? Who gave you passage?" The boy squirmed slightly, testing the space around him, but there was no opening. My presence held him like gravity. Slowly, reluctantly, he relented. "Hex," he whispered. "It was Hex who taught us the words." I stiffened. My blood chilled. She gave us the magic, old words, pulled from beneath the black rivers. He said they would pierce the veil. She told us how to step through unnoticed. His eyes darted toward the window as if expecting something to come bursting through at any moment. "I'm not the only one here," he added in a strained voice, almost pleading now. "There are more of us, stronger than me, and not all of them come with warnings. Some don't speak at all." The room seemed to shrink around us, the candlelight flickering uneasily, as if disturbed by the magnitude of what he'd just said. Hex. The exile. The traitor. The one who tore truth from prophecy and fed it to the desperate. She had opened the gate. And now the children of gods walked the earth, barefoot, burning, and hunting. With a burst of force, I hurled the boy to the ground. He hit the floor with a sharp thud, limbs sprawling as the air fled his lungs in a gasp. For a moment, he writhed like a puppet with tangled strings, clutching at his throat, fingers pawing helplessly at the mark I'd left there. A vivid, crimson imprint blazed across his skin, glowing faintly as it pulsed with residual magic. He scratched at it like it was burning him from the inside out. But my mind had already shifted elsewhere. Chris. Where was he? Why hadn't I noticed his absence sooner? Guilt gnawed at the edges of my awareness, sharp and relentless. He had been right there, not moments ago. Laughing, talking, breathing, and now, gone. Slipped through the cracks while I had been busy interrogating a boy with green fire and borrowed divinity. A deep frustration rose in my chest, twisting with dread as I glared down at the boy who was now trembling, his bravado reduced to quiet, pathetic gasps. How many? I demanded. My voice echoed in the room like a blow, no softness, no space for resistance. He hesitated, just long enough for me to raise my hand, fingers curling into the air like a snare. I whispered a binding phrase under my breath, and a warm current of compulsion surged from my palm, invisible but potent. The truth would be pulled from him now, whether he wanted it or not. There are 5, he choked out, his voice hoarse, eyes wide and glassy. 5 who came through. 5, not including him. That meant 6 in total. Before the full weight of that number could settle in, I cut through the air with a sharp motion, carving a trail through space with magic honed by desperation. The edges of reality curled like burned parchment, and in a blink, I vanished from the room and reappeared elsewhere. Downstairs. But not just downstairs. A different realm entirely. This version of the bar was muted, uncanny, like a reflection in water, all the pieces present but warped. Sounds felt muffled, laughter distorted, and colors too saturated or too dim. It was the same place, but drawn through a dream or a nightmare. I stepped into the press of the crowd, pushing past shoulders and shadows, searching every face. My heart pounded as I moved from one stranger to the next, grabbing arms, making eye contact, calling his name. Chris, tall, sharp jaw, that scar beneath his left eye, always wore his jacket open. Have you seen him? Blank stares, puzzled expressions, shakes of the head. No one knew him. No one had even heard the name. My stomach clenched. The edges of the room began to feel farther away, like the walls were stretching, retreating. The bar lights flickered overhead as I stumbled toward the one place that might still make sense, toward familiarity. Timothy, Grace. They sat together near the fireplace now, her head resting gently on his shoulder, his hand wrapped around hers. They looked so untouched, like this world had passed them by. And for a moment, I considered asking them, letting the calm of their presence anchor me. But before I could, a figure stepped into my path. Marilyn. He was suddenly there, as if plucked from a different scene entirely, holding a half-finished drink in one hand. His brow was furrowed, and though he wore his usual mask of mischief, it was cracked with something darker. "Brother," he said, his tone a blend of warning and urgency. "You need to come with me. It's about Chris." I hesitated. His words stopped my breath in my chest. He knew. But how? My eyes narrowed as I searched his face for deceit, but there was no time. The gnawing in my gut screamed louder than my suspicion. I followed. We moved through a narrow hallway that seemed longer than it should have been, the noise of the bar vanishing behind us like a memory. The walls darkened with every step. Candles lined the path, their flames bending toward us as we passed, casting long shadows that danced and whispered against the plaster. Finally, we entered a room cloaked in shadow. No lamps, no windows. Only the faintest glimmer of moonlight slipped through a narrow slit in the wall. The air here was wrong, thick and heavy, laced with some ancient ruins, like incense from a forgotten ritual. Panic flared in my chest. I turned sharply to face Marilyn. "Where is he?" I barked, tension cracking in my voice like a whip. "Where's the boy? Where's Chris?" Marilyn stood near the far wall, half lit by the moonlight. His silhouette looked longer than usual, his face carved into sharp planes by shadow. He sipped slowly from his glass and lowered it with a deliberateness that chilled me. A slow, twisted smile unfurled across his lips. "You always were slow with the pieces," he said, a glint of mockery in his voice. I stepped toward him, fists clenched, but he raised a single hand. "Do you remember Caroline?" The name hit me like a thrown stone. I froze. The name vibrated through the room, through me, like a ripple on still water. Caroline. Memory collided with reality. The girl who vanished from the sanctum 72 years ago. Who was said to have died during a divine crossing gone wrong. The girl whose name was never spoken again in our circles. I stared at Marilyn, realization flooding me like a rising tide. His expression never changed, but his eyes burned with something feral. "You didn't," I whispered. My voice sounded distant. "You didn't bring his mother here." He grinned wider now, tipping his head like a magician revealing the final card. "Not exactly," he said, voice silked in danger. "But she helped bring them through. And she wants her son back." My blood ran cold. Chris. He was her son. And now they were coming for him. I spun around, the world tilting as realization crashed over me like a rogue wave. My hand instinctively flew to my temple, as though trying to massage the confusion and betrayal out of my skull. The pieces clicked into place with the weight of a falling hammer. Marilyn wasn't just complicit in this mess. He was orchestrating it. And he was enjoying it. "Where is the boy, Marilyn?" I demanded, my voice ringing through the darkness with steel-edged frustration. "Where is he?" He didn't answer. He laughed. It was a cruel, hollow sound, like wind echoing through a long-abandoned cathedral, mocking and cavernous. It bounced off the shadowed walls, wrapping around me in cruel loops. The sound didn't belong to the brother I had known, not entirely. Something had twisted in him, and now that corruption oozed out between every word, every gesture, every grin. I turned toward the door, hand extended, desperate to be free of this suffocating gloom. My fingers grazed the cold metal of the knob, and seared with sudden, blinding pain. I hissed and recoiled, shaking my hand and examining the red welt now blooming across my palm, raw and pulsing. Behind me, Marilyn's voice rose again, thicker now, coated in something immoral. "The Destroyer made this place for me," he said, stepping forward slowly, shadows sliding with him like cloaks. "You can't leave without my command." His smile thinned into something blade-like. "So let's not waste time pretending." My breath caught. The Destroyer. That name wasn't spoken lightly, not in any realm. To invoke it was to summon consequence. He took another step, and I instinctively backed away, each inch feeling more boxed in than the last. His face, usually so boyish, so filled with mischief, was now frozen in a mask devoid of warmth. He tilted his head upward, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might strike, might bring his wrath crashing down upon me like a god unhinged. His eyes, those same eyes I had grown up with, were bottomless now. An abyss in motion. I could see it behind them, the swirling chaos of grief and madness, the fragile thread of sanity fraying with every breath he took. "Your best option, Eden," he said, voice like silk laced with venom, "is to sit here and talk about Caroline." At her name, the room seemed to sigh, soft and mournful. Something in the walls shifted, the darkness curling inward like a curtain drawing closed. He lowered his head slowly, the sharp planes of his face lit by the moon's narrow beam. That smile returned, but now it was softer, sadder, though no less dangerous. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how to wound you and was already planning where to strike. And yes, I remembered Caroline. Her name wasn't just a memory. It was a thread through my soul, thin and golden, humming with echoes of the past. Caroline Witherspoon, 8 years old, bright-eyed, barefoot more often than not. She had been made of laughter and sunlight, of stories told under stars and hands stained with chalk and paint. The world to her was a canvas, and she had believed, truly believed, that magic was meant to make things more beautiful. She was wrong. Caroline had ventured into a place she should never have touched, a world of ancient symbols and fiery spells meant only for those far older and far colder than her. She had tried to create something beautiful, something radiant. And instead, she had summoned fire. Hellfire. It took her in a breath, consumed her body, her joy, her tiny, trembling fingers. And yet, even in her final moments, through the agony, she smiled. That impossible, radiant smile, like she didn't blame the world at all. She died in my arms. I still remember the smell of her hair. But Marilyn, he hadn't held her. He hadn't seen her die. All he had known was the aftermath, the scorched stones of the ritual circle, the charred outline of his daughter, and my face too broken to explain. That loss had shattered him. He never recovered. Where once had been a scholar and craftsman of divine magic, there now stood a hollow man chasing his own echoes. He became obsessed, desperate. A sparrow caught in a storm, always crying, always waiting for someone, anyone, to hear his grief, to understand it, to fix it. And I had failed him. I avoided the topic, avoided her, avoided him. And now, here we were. The spell of memory loosened its grip, and I saw him again as he truly was. Standing before me, a fractured man who had invited darkness into his bones in hopes of seeing his daughter's face again. Something in me softened. I walked to him, slowly, deliberately, my limbs heavy as stone. A choice weighed inside me, fight or understand, and for now, I chose the latter. I lowered myself into the chair beside him, the wood groaning under my weight. A silence stretched between us, electric and raw. I glanced over and offered a simple gesture, a thread of peace pulled from deep within my chest. "Are you going to sit?" I asked softly, my voice no longer harsh, but not without caution. He blinked. His mouth twitched. Something flickered in his eyes, hesitation, perhaps, or pain remembered too clearly. Then, wordlessly, he shuffled toward the second chair and sank into it. The air between us shifted, no longer charged with confrontation, but with something even more dangerous, truth. Grief. And the ghosts we both carried. His eyes locked onto mine, haunted, hollow, and yet burning with a storm that refused to be contained. Grief shimmered beneath the surface, fragile but unrelenting. "Do you remember what she looked like, Eden?" he asked, his voice cracking like a whisper carried across broken glass. I didn't answer. "She had jet black hair," he continued, his gaze drifting, unfocused, as though the past had pulled him into its tide. It blended into the dark like smoke curling into shadows. You'd look right at her and lose her to the night. He paused, swallowing hard, then continued, softer now. And her eyes. Those ice blue eyes. Like still water before a storm. Piercing. Pure. Unforgiving. I saw it then, not just the memory, but the weight of it pressing down on him, bending his spine, curling his shoulders inward. As though every word he uttered carved another notch into his soul. "She was pale," he murmured, glowing, really. Her skin caught the light like glass catching flame, too delicate for this world. He looked down at his hands, as if expecting to see hers there. She was an angel. And he shook his head. I was anything but. We both knew it. I saw him shrinking before me, the iron-blooded architect of half a dozen unspoken schemes now reduced to a man teetering on the edge of raw, bottomless despair. A brother unraveling. When I lost her. His voice cracked fully now, the weight of the words dragging each syllable. When I lost her, I didn't just lose a daughter. I lost the part of myself that still believed in goodness. He looked up, eyes glassy, skin pale. A man who destroyed entire universes of pain just to distract himself from one unbearable truth. "But then I found out," he said, rising slowly, tension vibrating in his limbs like coiled wire. His pacing began, deliberate, sharp steps slicing through the quiet of the room. "I found out what really happened to her." My breath caught. I knew what he meant. I knew what he'd uncovered. And I knew it was a truth I had been commanded to bury. "Marilyn," I began, but he didn't even pause. "She didn't die in the fire, did she?" he asked, voice laced with bitterness, his words like poison blooming in the air. "Not really." The truth hovered between us, weightless and unbearable. "She changed," he whispered, eyes narrowing. "Her soul didn't vanish into the deceased. It migrated, crossed, left this plane altogether. You knew that, didn't you, Eden? He turned toward me, his entire being radiating the energy of a man staring down the god who'd lied to him. You knew. I don't understand what you're talking about, I lied, but even as I said the words, they fell flat, transparent as glass. He stepped forward, silent, until he was close enough that I could feel the heat of his presence. His hand came to rest on my shoulder, heavy and deliberate. It was a strange gesture, gentle, yet filled with ominous intent. Grounding, but not comforting. You've always chosen silence, he said, his voice now barely above a breath. You let secrets fester instead of daring to face the grief they were meant to protect us from. But your silence isn't noble, Eden. It's costly. My jaw tightened. I could feel the magic emanating from his fingertips now, subtle, invisible coils wrapping around me like threads of smoke, threading into my very being. They weren't binding yet, but they were there, testing the limits of my will. He leaned down slightly, his breath ghosting across my ear, his words precise and devastating. While you choose to remain in the dark, people are dying tonight because of you. I jerked back slightly, eyes wide with horror. The air around us had turned heavy, warped with the thickness of fate closing in. You wouldn't, I breathed. But I didn't even believe it as I said it. Oh, I very much will, he replied, his voice like ice cracking underfoot. He stepped back, and in his face, I saw something terrible take root, purpose twisted by pain, cruelty born not from malice, but from love long since curdled. And that boy out there, he said, smiling now, though the smile was hollow, deranged. Timothy? The room seemed to contract around the name, the walls tightening, as if even the air flinched at what was to come. I'll ensure he meets his end, too. Because if he dies. He drew the sentence out, savoring every syllable like a dagger being slowly unsheathed. You know exactly who else dies. I froze. The implication was thunderous. If Chris died, if Timothy, you're a monster, I whispered, stepping back, but he followed, his presence swallowing every inch of space between us. No, he said, voice breaking into manic glee as he tilted his head toward the ceiling. I'm a father. Then he laughed, a sound so dark, so guttural, it seemed to claw at the very air. It wasn't laughter meant to amuse. It was a death knell. A storm breaking open from the chest of a man with nothing left to lose. And somewhere far beyond the walls of that cursed room, I could feel the threads of fate twisting, shifting, tightening. The game had changed, and he had just made his opening move. In that moment, with a single, unceremonious snap of his fingers, Marilyn unraveled reality. The sound, sharp, precise, rippled through the room like the crack of lightning across a dead sky. And then, as if the world itself had been listening, the shadows responded. They poured inward like ink spilled into water, an oily blackness that slithered through the air and clung to the walls like sentient smoke. Within seconds, they swallowed the room whole, weaving around us with terrifying purpose, draping everything in a suffocating veil of absolute night. The darkness wasn't just absence, it was presence. It watched. It listened. It hungered. I could feel it writhing, brushing against the edges of my thoughts like fingertips probing the contours of my mind. Malevolence pulsed with every breath I took, thickening the air until it tasted like ash on my tongue. Somewhere directly in front of me, I felt a presence, ancient, patient, and cruel. The devil did not announce himself with horns and fire, but with silence so complete that my heartbeat felt intrusive. He didn't need to touch me to torment me. He only needed to wait. But it wasn't my soul that was being hunted. Not yet. The real danger was already moving, slithering unseen past the doors and into the bar beyond. Then, like the exhale before a scream, the lights flickered off. The darkness loosened just slightly, revealing ghost-like outlines of tables, chairs, and startled faces, all frozen in confusion. Murmurs rose, scattered and nervous. Is this part of the party? Did the power go out? What's going on? The voices overlapped, some laughing awkwardly, others already scanning for exits. Then the light blinked out again. For a heartbeat, the void swallowed everything. And then, a scream. It tore through the silence, sharp and raw, a jagged wail that cut through flesh and thought alike. A woman, somewhere just beyond the center of the room, shrieked with a voice so full of panic it sounded inhuman. Another flicker of light burst into the space, and what it revealed made time stutter. A man crouched over her, his face buried in her neck, not kissing, not comforting. Feasting. His jaw unhinged grotesquely, lips smeared in a wet crimson grin. Her eyes bulged, terror frozen within them, her mouth open in a silent scream as her body twitched under him. He groaned like an animal at a trough, his hunger unrelenting. Blood soaked the floor in thick puddles beneath them. Then, darkness again, and the world collapsed into chaos. The bar erupted with motion. People screamed and shoved, chairs splintered, glass exploded under frantic footsteps. A dozen voices cried out in confusion, then 30 more joined them in panic. The air turned hot with fear, the walls pulsing with disorientation as if the room itself had come alive and was twisting inward. Doors were gone, replaced by black corridors that stretched out like tunnels into nowhere. The structure of the place had changed. People ran in circles, some weeping, others calling out names that vanished into the thick, shapeless dark. In the corner, lit only by the dying flicker of an overturned lamp, Timothy and Grace clung to each other on a half-torn couch, their skin pale with fear. His hands trembled violently as he scanned the madness, sweat glistening at his brow. "We need to get out of here, right now." Timothy cried out, his voice strained, cracking with urgency. He grabbed Grace's wrist with a strength born of desperation, trying to yank her to her feet. But Grace didn't move. She stood still, her eyes wide, but not with panic. Her gaze was locked on the door to the stairwell, her lips barely parting. "We can't leave them," she said, her voice thin and trembling. "Eden, Chris, they're still in here somewhere." Timothy shook his head. "We'll come back. We have to go, please, Grace." He tugged harder, too hard. Grace winced, twisting in his grip. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as a small scratch bloomed beneath his fingers, thin but vivid, a red reminder of his fear-fueled strength. She pulled away. "Stop," she said sharply, her tone sharper than it had ever been with him. He stared at her in stunned silence. Then the crowd surged again. Bodies slammed past them, shadows blurring the faces. Timothy was jostled back into the tide, arms flailing, mouth open in a silent call. "Grace!" he cried out, but she was already gone, her figure swallowed by the night, her name ripped from his mouth by the wind of the fleeing crowd. She never looked back. Grace ran not out of fear, but toward it. Her chest pounded, not from panic, but from purpose. She could feel something unraveling upstairs. Something unnatural. Something important. She slipped between broken furniture, climbing the staircase 2 steps at a time, her breath short, her vision blurry. The only light guiding her was the pale, haunting glow of the moon filtering through the cracked upper windows, casting long ribbons of silver across the warped wood floors. And then, she stopped. At the top of the stairs, just beyond the archway, stood a figure. A nun. At least, that's what she appeared to be. She was dressed in robes of deepest black, a veil draped over her face, obscuring every feature. Her body stood motionless, yet the air around her trembled. She clutched a bouquet of green roses in her left hand, roses that shimmered unnaturally, their petals shifting like leaves made of emerald flame. That left hand shook. The fingers were twisted, gnarled, trembling with age, as though the act of simply holding the bouquet was a burden. Her knuckles were swollen, skin paper thin. But her right hand, it didn't match. The right hand was young, smooth and elegant, unweathered. It glowed faintly, its stillness too perfect, like a sculpture carved by a divine artisan. The flesh hummed faintly with an aura that vibrated between the physical and the ethereal, like something long dead, remembered by a god and temporarily brought back into being. Grace froze. The nun did not speak, did not move, only watched. Then, slowly, she raised her right hand, not to strike, but to beckon. One slow, deliberate motion. A gesture older than language. An invitation. Grace took a step forward, and the air around her changed. One by one, the nun began to pluck the roses from their stems. Each loose bloom drifted to the floor, crimson petals pooling like fresh wounds upon the cold wood. Grace stood frozen, paralyzed by both shock and sorrow. Each fallen rose echoed in her mind like a dropped heartbeat, the silence after each thud heavier than the darkness itself. When the final stem gave way, the nun paused, still as a marble statue. She reached slowly for the cloth covering her face, peeling it back with an unnatural deliberation. As the mask fell away, Grace gasped, her heart lurching. She saw herself, her own face, yet twisted, marked by someone else's suffering, warped by unseen wickedness. The reflection was both familiar and grotesque. Fear flooded her veins. The nun's breath hitched, and as she smiled, Grace watched, horror-struck, as wrinkles carved themselves across her skin, crashing into being like fractures in glass. Lines multiplied in seconds, etching her face with centuries. Grace's lungs constricted. Teeth loosened next, coating the floor with shards of enamel that matched the roses. Her eyes emptied, clouding to a milky haze as her vision faded. Then came the spine-chilling unnaturalness. She arched backward, a marionette on invisible strings, and stepped forward toward Grace, each footfall deliberate and resonant in the hush. Then came the sound, low, wet, guttural. From the nun's throat, not quite human, not quite alive. Her voice gurgled up from some sunken depth of nightmare. Death is coming for you. Run. Run. The Father in Black is coming. Run before it's too late. It was an incantation and a prophecy wrapped in fear, spat out in a thick, muffled tone that crawled over Grace's skin. That voice snapped something in Grace, herself, her fears, her heart, and she spun away, eyes wild, sprinting toward a door left ajar. She slammed it behind her, the lock clicking home just as something, or someone, thundered against it. The Father in Black is coming. The Father in Black is coming, the nun chanted in a frenzied tone, banging harder, nails scraping raw wood. Grace backed away, her chest heaving, and then she froze. There it was, a rhythmic drip. Drip. In the blackness, a wet sound that tapped out a code of doom. She turned slowly, dread pooling at the base of her spine. What awaited her in the obscurity was worse than she feared. A man stood just behind her, his gun leveled, barrel hovering in front of her temple. His posture was calm, deliberate, and sinister. His skin sagged and hollowed like a deflated balloon, stretched too thin to cover the bones beneath. He wore the visage of someone carved from sorrow and sin. But it was his eyes, bright, icy cobalt blue, that held Grace in place. They glowed in the dimness, as if lit by some inner fire. They were the eyes of a hunter, gleaming with both detachment and menace. At his feet stood a large dog, fur as dark as spilled ink, its coat absorbing the shadows. Its posture was rigid, alert, breathing chiming in flawless unison with the man's, a living extension of something ancient, feral, and wholly unforgiving. Grace's heart thrashed. Her breath caught. The room stretched and compressed around her, time thinning to this one moment, this one choice. There was nowhere left to run. Only the gun. Only the dog. Only the man with the glowing eyes. And the echo of a warning still ringing in her mind, the Father in Black is coming. Just as Grace's mind scrambled for an escape route, the man moved with lethal precision. In a swift, fluid motion, he loaded a single bullet into his weapon, the metallic click ringing sharp in the oppressive silence. Then, with a sneer curling his lips, he spat deliberately onto the ground at Grace's feet, a dark promise that any foolish attempt to flee would end in instant death. His voice sliced through the air, low and disturbingly calm, like a predator toying with its prey. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he murmured, the words dripping with icy menace. Grace's gaze darted reflexively to the window, seeking any chance of escape through the faint moonlight bleeding into the room. But the man wasn't fooled. "Now, I know you hear me talking to you," he said, the hint of a sinister smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I don't have to kill you tonight." His tone grew colder, sharper. "I'm just looking for someone, and I think you might be able to help me find them. So, if you could stop staring out of that window for just a moment." Grace's breath caught. Slowly, agonizingly, she shifted her eyes from the window back to him, feeling the weight of his gaze like a vice squeezing her chest. Her body was taut, every muscle trembling beneath clammy skin, sweat slicking her temples like a trapped animal ready to bolt. "I don't know what you're looking for," she whispered, voice fragile but steady. The man cocked his head, amusement flickering in his glowing blue eyes. A harsh, derisive chuckle escaped him as he lowered the gun ever so slightly, a taunt rather than a concession. "I'm here for Chris Blaze," he said flatly, scrutinizing her face for the slightest twitch of recognition, any crack in her mask. Grace fought to hold her composure, even as her heart thundered like a wild drum. "I don't know who that is," she insisted, voice barely audible. A slow, sinister smile spread across his hollowed features. Without warning, his hand shot out like a striking serpent. His fingers closed around Grace's throat in a brutal grip, lifting her clean off the ground. Panic exploded behind her eyes as her lungs screamed for air, the world shrinking to a hazy tunnel of shade and misery. She clawed at his arm, desperation lending strength, but he was relentless. His crushing hold drained the color from her skin, and her vision began to fray at the edges, blurring, darkening. Then, shattering the oppressive silence, a loud crash ripped through the room. The door erupted open, and Timothy stormed in like a tempest, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Grace!" He raised his hand, glowing with raw energy. The man was hurled backward against the wall, his chokehold instantly broken. Grace collapsed to the floor, gasping desperately for stolen breaths. The large black dog growled, sensing the threat, and lunged to flee, but Timothy's reflexes were faster. With a swift motion, he seized the creature's collar and flung it aside, buying them precious seconds. Grace barely hesitated. Her eyes snapped to the window once more, and with a surge of adrenaline, she vaulted through it without looking back. Timothy followed, his expression a mix of disbelief and fierce determination. They hit the ground tough, rolling through dirt and tangled grass to soften their fall. Grace scrambled up, heart pounding wildly, and immediately saw Timothy clutching his leg, a grimace twisting his usually stoic face. Despite his supernatural resilience, the pain was real, a stark reminder of his mortality. With firm resolve, Grace wrapped her arm around his shoulders, steadying him. Together, they limped away from the shattered room, every step heavy but urgent. Glancing back, she caught sight of the man and his dog standing ominously at the broken window. Their eyes locked on the fleeing pair, cold and unreadable. For a brief moment, Grace braced herself for the crack of gunfire, but the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The man said nothing. He simply watched. A sudden, stabbing pain exploded where Timothy's hand gripped her arm, an icy coil twisting deep inside her flesh, like a dark omen pulsing with menace. Before she could cry out, Marilyn spoke from the shadows, pulling them into a dim, claustrophobic room that felt like a realm untouched by daylight, heavy with unspoken threats. "Welcome to the real hunt," he whispered, but nowhere in sight. His voice sneered, thick with mockery and something far colder beneath. "You're quite the little human." His laughter was sharp, brittle, mocking Timothy's stubborn endurance. "Timothy is surprisingly resilient," he added with a dark chuckle that echoed through the room like a sinister melody. My eyes dropped instinctively, refusing to meet my brother's gaze. The weight of his presence pressed down on me, a suffocating force that threatened to crush my resolve. But summoning every shred of courage I could muster, I lifted my eyes, meeting his stare, as he toyed with a mirror in his hands, speaking to them from the shadows. In that instant, the oppressive darkness surrounding us evaporated, replaced by a sudden, disorienting brilliance. The cold, shadowed room dissolved like smoke, and we were transported, transfixed, into a world starkly different. We stood in a lavish penthouse, perched high above a sprawling cityscape. Whether Los Angeles or New York, I couldn't tell, but the view was breathtaking. A vast sea of glittering light stretched endlessly beneath them, punctuated by towering skyscrapers that pierced the night sky like giants. The city twinkled and pulsed, alive with restless energy. Inside, the penthouse was an oasis of opulence, sleek, modern furnishings, bathed in the soft glow of muted lamps. Plush velvet sofas invited comfort, marble surfaces reflected the gentle ambient light, and subtle notes of soft vinyl music wafted through the air, a melancholic melody weaving around the room like a ghost. Amid this luxury, I felt an overwhelming tide of confusion swell within my chest, churning like a storm. Why had Marilyn brought me here? What was the purpose behind this cruel, surreal display? Frantically, I scoured my memory, searching for fragments, clues, anything that could illuminate the path through this bewildering maze of remembrances and reality. My voice broke the silence, trembling but insistent. "Marilyn, we need to talk about Caroline," I said, the urgency threading my words like a lifeline. Across the room, Marilyn sat with casual ease on a plush couch, the amber glow of a whiskey glass cradled in his hand. He swirled the liquid thoughtfully, the soft clink of glass against glass filling the silence with a haunting rhythm, like the ticking of a clock counting down to some inevitable reckoning. His gaze lifted slowly, locking onto me with an intensity that made my stomach twist. "Where is Caroline?" he asked quietly, the question heavy with unspoken grief and denial. "I know she's not dead." The weight of his words settled over Mr. like a shroud. The air thickened, charged with a desperate hope and unbearable sorrow. And in that charged moment, a sudden flash of understanding struck me, lightning splitting the sky in a furious storm. Memories long buried, shards of the past we had tried so hard to forget, surged up, raw and painful. The truth, long hidden beneath layers of pain and silence, clawed its way to the surface, unrelenting, undeniable.